The first roundtable session topic is Africa Builds the Future. We're focusing on innovation, identity, and influence in a global architecture. This conversation aims to explore the idea of borderless design and how the next generation of African architects can access and thrive on global stages, drawing from our experiences, your experiences, and insights. It's supposed to be a collaborative roundtable session. So we can even have inputs from the crowd because we have professionals in the crowd. Our moderator, architect Moniba Odunlami, managing partner at Design Fits and Nigerian Institute of Architects, Lagos chapter, vice chair. She's also an experienced project manager with a demonstrated history of working in the financial services industry. Can we give a round of applause for her as she comes up on stage? It's not easy to be a pretty, beautiful woman. Let's keep clapping till she comes up stage. Can we just give it up for her style? Come on, look at that beautiful style on her. Welcome. Up next, I'll be moving on to the profile of our panelists. Mr. Tuoyo Jemerigbe is the managing director and principal studio OLA Limited. He is a project development expert and architect whose work spans real estate, design execution, and community-focused development. He is recognized for his pragmatic approach to turning vision into buildable, impactful structures and for championing emerging talent in the design and construction ecosystem. Can we give a round of applause, please, as it comes up on stage? Please, please, please. Homework group. It's your clap that should be the loudest in this room. Oh. People are clapping demurely. You know, you clap with enthusiasm, energy. You don't know it's you people that are doing something today. You are the owner of party. We just were escorts. Okay. If I remind the people again, if our clap on this side is more than your clap on this side, you people will stand. Next, we have Dr. Stephen Ajadi, who is the principal at Ruben Architecture Office. He is an architect, urbanist, and systems thinker who fuses research, design, and policy. He is known for his innovative approach to inclusive urbanism and has contributed significantly to development discourse in Africa. As the founder of the African Urbanism Lab, his work spans through academia, practice, and social transformation. Can we welcome him up stage? Can we welcome him up stage, please? Thank you so much. All right, and last on this panel, we're going to be having Adebimpe Makinde, who is the managing partner of One Stream Consultants. He is a member of the Nigerian Institute of Architects with over 16 years post-qualification experience. He was a one-time associate director at Adeni Ikoka Consultants Limited, where he was involved in a myriad of project types in various capacities, including heading the design team on the 15-story Nestle headquarters in Victoria Island, Lagos, built by industry giant Julius Berger. Can we give a round of applause as he comes up stage? If you know the building, you will clap more than that. The problem is that maybe you guys are on the mainland like me, so you don't know that building in VI. If you know the building, you will know the work that went into building such a monument. I'm going to be handing the room over to our beautiful moderator as she moderates this session. Once again, please get your questions ready because we're not going to have enough time to go around the room. So if you have any questions or you have any contributions or something of value to add, please just help us note it down. Over to you, Maya.
The topic for this roundtable discussion, as they said earlier, is Africa Builds the Future. Innovation, identity, and influence in global architecture. So my first question, which I'm hoping each of our panelists will just take 1 or 2 minutes to start off with giving us some information on is, does Africa have an identity in the global space? What is that identity? What are the characteristics of African architecture? How does Africa currently influence global architecture? So that's just the start-off point. Again, I think some of my questions might be a little bit in depth and into it because I'm an architect. So please permit us as we go ahead and I try to drill into the brains of our esteemed panelists. And hopefully, so who's going to go first for us?
I think you asked 3 questions in one. Yes. You just kind of made a hybrid of everything. The identity of architecture or the identity of Africa in the global space is a very broad question because that cuts across architecture. You're talking of who Africa is. But then if you bring it down to the built environment, I think there are 2 sides to that coin. I think there's what we think of ourselves, and then there's what the West thinks of us. From the standpoint of architecture, I think that we have an inferiority complex of ourselves. We think we have to catch up with the West. We think that things are not being done properly. We think that, and that's the identity we have of ourselves. In the Western world, I think they see us at the forefront. And at the very highest cutting edge of technology and very highest cutting edge of planning and architecture, they are trying to catch up with us. And that might be very difficult to imagine. I've been fortunate to work and teach and also collaborate with some institutions that some people might call the leading institutions in the world, from Cambridge to Harvard to Oxford and all these places. And then you realize that even at the Architectural Association in London, what we teach, we're always looking at Africa as the beacon, as the example, when it comes to combating climate change, creating low-cost housing, and basically the sophistication of urbanity. Okay. Africa has always been the reference point. But the way we think of ourselves is different. Our identity is or the way we see ourselves is, we have to catch up with what the West is doing. Exactly. We have to improve ourselves. And it trickles down from the way we see ourselves as designers and the way real estate people see us and the way real estate people see themselves. And then the consumers. Like something sells better a table sells better if it's a marble table from Italy than if it's a mahogany wood from Benin. So sure. The sale is different. And I think those are the 2 main sides of the identity.
Okay. I'll circle back to you in a bit more detail on what we think of ourselves, but I'll pass the mic to Architect Makinde. What are your thoughts on the characteristics of African architecture, as in from your perspective, how does Africa currently influence global architecture?
As depicted in popular culture, in movies and all of that, you tend to see a lot of rustic architecture, I would say. A lot of building with, what you see, mud, wood, and things that you have around us. But I wanted to touch quickly on identity. We need to, as we're seeing in a lot of other industries, be proud of our identity. What our music industry is doing, for instance, what the arts and culture, the movie industry is doing, for instance. Not until you begin to own your identity, because you can't do others like others do, you have to do yourself. And so where we see a lot of our, what's happening in the music industry, where we're claiming our own identity, we're being proud of who we are, we're not trying to copy anybody, you find a lot of acceptance and a lot of, there's a lot more people believe more in you because you're doing what you know how to do best. So the question is, how can that be, the question I always ask myself, how can we bring that into what we do in architecture? Architecture is a totally different kettle of fish. It's buildings are a lot more complex than what we had in the past. Technology and science drives a lot of how our architecture should look like. So I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we merge that? How do we remain true to ourselves while using a lot of the abundant resources that we have around us? Africa is so full of, I think we're basically, there are more resources here than I think in any other space. The weather, the climate is fantastic. So how do we use our resources, our identity, who we are, how do we translate that on complex buildings? I think that's the question. There's issue of sustainability that we can easily take control of, because again, we have the sun is abundant over here. We don't need to, all of the sustainability goals that we try to achieve, all of that can easily be achieved here. So I think in terms of African architecture, the characteristics that you're looking for, we need to be able to merge what we have locally in achieving those complex buildings that we need for large-scale development in urban areas. I think that's the challenge, or that's what we should try and achieve with what we have locally.
I will circle back to you on materials, because you said something very, very critical. But I'll allow architect Tuoyo give us his own perspective on the architecture in Africa. I
think there are certain perspectives that will always play a part. I think the conversation about materiality and sustainability, the conversation about culture and cultural identity, and then even referencing tradition as well. Dr. Stephen had said something about how I think we oftentimes try to copy and imitate and adapt that which is Western, because we tend to think it is better from an inferiority complex. I think the reality is we do have a tendency to. It's not unique to us. In Dubai, people are building glass towers, even though they're in desert country. So it's not sort of like a negative that is unique to Africans or to us. But I think the more and more we start to look back and learn from history, understand and build for our climate, build for our environment, build and design for our people, have social inclusion in design and planning, have social equity in design considerations, and look and learn from things done before and suitable for environment, and then the R&D to support that as well. We do have a few unique architects and superstars that are maybe blazing the torch to promote African architecture globally, but more often than not, you find that they are promoting African architecture in Africa to the world, and not necessarily the other way around. And there's a place for that. And I think, and the more and more we innovate and we plan and design and celebrate our own aesthetics and culture, the more and more the world will continue to look at us for ingenious ways of designing for the people and the place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. So I will just go a little deeper by asking some specific questions to each architect. I'll kick off again with Dr. Stephen. So as an African architect, how has your personal cultural values, beliefs, and traditions influenced your design choices and building styles?
Complicated question. Because sometimes you have to, I think influence, your own cultural influence in architecture is such as, I think it's like an equalizer, or you treat it like, this equalizer you have in music where you raise up the bass, you raise up, you have to control the magnitude of your influence depending on the project you're working on. I mean, there's some places where it's not about you. I mean, we're doing something in Liberia at the moment right now. It's a cultural project in Liberia. I'm a Yoruba man, it has nothing to do with me. I'm not going to be egotistic enough to stamp my own cultural values on that kind of project. It's an urban project, which means the impact of culture is even stronger.
Yeah, so maybe let me rearrange the question to say, how are you able to influence different cultures in your different designs?
Yeah, I was discussing with GDS today. I think it's about humility. Knowing what to put in front and what to put in the background. We all have ways of designing. There are about 4 architects on this table, and there are 4 ways of approaching a single project.
Absolutely.
4 ways of designing.
We all speak the same language, architecture, but our dialects are different. And so the dialect comes, as Jack Derrida would say, it comes from culture. And I don't want to go to the technicalities of how that connects philosophically, but the idea is it's about the language, and the language is an architecture, and the language is also our culture. The difference between the Western world and the African space is there's a lesser heterogeneous character to culture in the West. In the UK, for example, apart from the immigration, you see that holistically, they have holistic cultures. In Nigeria, for example, you have about 500 different languages, 300 different ethnic groups, distinct ethnic groups, by the way, not just ethnic groups that merge into each other. And the funny thing is that most of us have our architecture, most of us. So within 300 different ethnic groups, you have about 258 cultures of building, of architecture. And some ethnic groups are about 10,000 people, very minute. They still have their own way of building. And then, of course, we have the largest, which is the Hausa group. And they also have their own way of building. And even even what we call the Hausa group in the north, because those of us in the south, we call everybody in the north Hausa. And that's not right. There's so many of them. As a matter of fact, the highest heterogeneity you have is even in the north. And then they all have their own different ways of approaching stuff. So when you talk about how it influences on a brief to brief basis. The language is there as somebody who comes from a particular culture. What's the language of my ancestors and what actually forged me into becoming an architect today. I'm lucky, by the way, to have my culture forge me into an architect. Some other people went to school in Newcastle, studied Norman Foster and stuff, and you ask them to mention 10 architects between 10 Nigerian architects between 10 pre-colonial Nigerian architects, they can't. 10 post-colonial Nigerian architects between 1960 and 1990, they can't. Some people only know architects that have emerged in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And to make it even more complicated, to mention 10 Nigerian architects that existed 300 years ago, they can't. And it's not because they shouldn't, it's just because they were not taught in school. It's not in the curriculum. We don't study medieval architecture, we don't study architecture in the Stone Age. We don't even know there were architects at that time. We don't even believe, because
the Western posturing of architecture is that nothing happened in Africa pre-colonial. We wrote the script, and so that's why you have atrocious data like the building in Badagry being the first story building in Nigeria. Nothing could be further from the truth. And that was in the curriculum in the University of Lagos when I did one of my masters there. The point is, this thing is online. It's what people preach, and therefore, I teach at the AA school sometimes. Most of the time in London, and a student will say, "Oh, we'll reference that building in talking about Nigerian architecture." So, in her mind or his mind as a student, or even a scholar and an architect, they believe that the first time we put a floor on top of another floor in this space that we call Nigeria was about 160 years ago, or 150 years ago, right? And that do you know how primitive that is? And not only and the funny thing is that the first time a floor was put on another floor was actually in Africa, not even in the West. But we don't dig deep because it's very difficult, and colonialism buried it so deep, so it's very difficult to reach back. And so the history of Lagos just starts from the Portuguese and the Brazilians. And so you find architectural historians in Lagos, the ones who think they know their stuff, they always talk about, Portuguese, Brazilian. So when you want to value a building, or a building has value in Lagos, it has to have the influence of the Portuguese, the British, and that is so recent. It's about 200 years ago.
Lagos, before Lagos became Lagos, had existed. Lagos is about 769, 770, give or take, years old. People were not living on trees.
They had buildings, they had urban systems, they had transportation systems, they had sewage systems. We don't care about that. We only care for when the Brazilians came and said, now you guys exist, and this is how we build. And the buildings that we now see here were brought from slaves who actually were like spectators of the architecture there. So when you ask me how my identity shapes into that thing, my identity, apart from bringing myself to the fore, I bring the entire African space to the fore. And it's most of the time very combative. Because it's combative because when you come to that space, you have to contend with the existing rigid narratives that are very shallow and false. And you have to battle with those. And it's exhausting sometimes, especially when you want to make money.
What is actually important here is that as Africans, we are the ones that should tell our story.
Nobody will tell it for you.
Nobody else will tell it for us. We have to be the ones to tell our stories. The narratives that we know for certain are false or incorrect, we have to be the one to put the correct information forward. Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen. I'll move on very quickly to Architect Makinde. It's very interesting that today is probably the first time I'm learning you were very, very involved in the Nest Oil building. So my question to you, very, very perfect and apt. So sustainable design practices, such as energy efficient designs and green building certifications, are becoming increasingly important in global architecture. So how are we as Africans able to infuse that into our landscape?
I think sustainability, for the most part, is really about energy efficiency, renewable energy, which we do have in abundance over here. It's sunny every day, so most people, it's easier these days. I mean, you hear a lot about most people trying to go off the grid completely, where, with solar harvesting, you can run an entire building, no matter how sophisticated, with proper solar panel, I think there's a building here on, I think, opposite, I think it's opposite, it's in VI here, where the entire cladding of the building envelope itself.
Lagos Island.
The
Sterling Bank.
Sterling Bank, correct. The entire building absorbs, sunlight every day. So imagine being able to run a building without having to use a drop of diesel on a daily basis. You know how much that costs, particularly with the cost of energy over here now. Harvesting rainfall so you could reuse the water within the building. I think so I think we are blessed in this part of the world. We can actually run buildings with very little energy cost, but we have to be deliberate about it. There was one thing, he mentioned about our identity being able to, how our identity is expressed. For architects, I think sometimes there's also a need to understand clearly that first and foremost, the client owns the project. So a lot of time we are really interpreting clients' dreams. That's what it is. Sometimes we get very emotional and passionate and try to insert ourselves in the dreams. If you have a strong-minded client, he will let you know that you should stay out of the dream and just interpret what you're. But being able to do that means that sometimes we can't really stamp our, how would I put it, our cultural influences directly on what we do because we are, satisfying what a client wants. So I think in as much as we have that role to play in ensuring that we are true to ourselves, our buildings and architecture stay true to our architectural, our identity, cultural and otherwise, and he's right, there are so many, different cultural practices, ethnic groups and all that. I think in Kaduna, I was shocked once to hear that there are about 60 different ethnic groups in Kaduna alone, and everybody has his own way of doing things and all that. We need to be able to push that narrative to be able to convince the general public that, look, there are ways to do this that don't have to necessarily copy what we see in the West. Exactly. And that way, what someone like Francis Kerr is doing, for instance, with a lot of the schools he's building, using materials found locally on ground. There's a lot of more different stones that you can use to build without transporting. There's wood, and then making buildings in such a way that even without you deliberately going out of your way to provide, paneling for solar harvesting. The buildings just function by themselves. They don't need too much air conditioning because those are some of your greatest loads, your air conditioning, cooling of the buildings. If we did more of that, letting our clients and the general public know that, look, these are the ways to do these things, even though clients want a certain things, because clients are influenced by what they see when they go outside of the country and all of that. But we need to let them know that, hey, it's a collective thing. It's for the entire, if we are able to bring down costs on things like energy collectively, it pushes money to other things that are more important, or rather, that would benefit society more.
Okay.
So I think,
All right. Thank you very much. Very quickly, we're running out of time. I will ask Architect Tuoyo. So technological advancements, what type of tools do we as architects here in Africa, quote unquote, what kind of tools are we using? How has the new trending AI tools affected your perspective on, and then how has it influenced your design inspiration? How have you been able to incorporate those technological advancements into your design process?
Well, I'll say, for me, maybe that question should be one for Stephen. But for me, I think the very first thing that lane that is opened up is information and access to information, because I think, at least from the time I was in college, a lot of our research was driven by, going to the library and reading books, buying books. Every time I traveled, my hand luggage used to be, overweight with just all sorts of books that I was buying just to feed my mind. But these days, throw something at ChatGPT, throw something in your Meta or anything, and you'll get information about just about anything. Even this topic for today, you throw it in and AI will throw information at you. And there's all sorts of technology, Mid-Journey, AI tools, design tools, where you would simply just describe a brief and direction of what you're thinking about and a problem, and AI will generate and give you visual ideas, and even trying to create rendering and things that were so much harder for us before. And there are many, many tools that even help you, like you can manipulate parametric modeling tools, where depending on the configuration of a site or what, you can manipulate those. Do I use a lot of those things at this time? No, not to their full extent, and not to the extent that the available technology can allow you to. It's still sort of like a bit more sort of hands-on and, looking and, nitpicking and managing and manipulating in the way, like you said, I was in school before you small. Thank God I don't look it. But I still sort of, draw strength from, the ears, the eyes, the
actual
the feel
experiences.
and the experience and whatnot. And I think Stephen knows, like, when I've designed for children or schools or academia, they're different. When you're talking about influences and whatnot, you have to decide, the school, I went to school in a different time from the school that I'm designing today. Should I allow that to inform or drive what I'm doing at this time? What should I incorporate? What about the technologies that they would need today for the schools and for the spaces that they work? But you still have to deal with some of the same old age-old problems, like, what's the power sustainability issues? Am I going to drive up? What's the transformer power generating capacity of the current school? If we upgrade, if we add this new building, how much more load do we bring? Do we trash out everything? Do we bring in a new? Can we add a bit? Do we reduce the energy consumption, energy loads? But some of those things, to an extent, technology can help you, like in analyzing building enclosure, to see if you can optimize the glass quality or specifications, the wall quality and specifications, the envelope build-up, so that you can reduce the energy loads and whatnot to the right sort of manageable proportion. So there are all kinds of ways that I think technology has helped. But I think for Africa and for Africans, I don't know that some of the software that I even described, some of them, not all of them, have been designed with Africa in mind. Like like the one parametric one that you manipulate is designed for European cities and American cities. More European actually than American. So that's not sort of tailored to us. Maybe we need to start to design.
Yeah, so how do we start? So I think that maybe this question or these ideas may go to our own tech and software developers here in Africa for us to collaborate with them and bring the ideas of the African influence for them to design that into the parameters that are available in those sorts of softwares.
And even the AI, sort of, like I said, the AI modeling apps and things, the data that's being put into them to develop those forms and those visual representations of architecture are probably done by some white kids based on their own somewhat ignorant notions of what African architecture should look like. So, I mean, you probably need to have a bit more diversity in or applications made by Africans
Exactly,
for
for Africans. Thank you very much. So we're going to wrap this up by asking if there are any questions on the platform at the moment. On the floor, okay. Please let us know who you're directing your question to.
So I'm going to act as provocateur a little bit on this. Very interesting conversation. And I think the common theme from what you've all said is the sort of need for individuality and identity to come forth. However, what are your thoughts on Pan-Africanism, right? Because, there's the individuality, as you've all mentioned, but there has to be a common theme, a common thread running right the way through. So I give you an example of European chic or Asian Zen. What do we have in terms of, as a people, as a culture, Nigeria, Africa, what do we have? What's the substance of what we have that can translate to that? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, you probably know about the very problematic phrase, Afro-minimalism. What are your thoughts on this as a segue from the first part of the question? And does it hold water? Does it hold sway in your opinion?
First of all, the manifestations of culture at the macro scale for different parts of the world do not necessarily have to be similar. So the way you have the Asian thing going on, the European thing going on, you might not necessarily have that for Africa, but you do. At the larger scale of the built environment, at the scale of, within the space of Africa, basically the philosophy, the overlying philosophy that has been found according to studies is Ubuntu. I am because we are. Ubuntu is the philosophy that drives our communal system. And our communal systems are very similar across the African space. I think that is like one of the largest things we know about cities, because people don't even know anything about cities. Even those of us who spend our entire lives and people who spend their entire lives studying cities don't really know much about cities. And one special thing about Africa is this. 100 years from now, the cities that will exist, 70% of the cities that will exist 100 years from now, I'm talking about the entire world, 70% of those cities do not currently exist. So in 100 years, there will be 70% new cities in 100 years. Now, of that 70%, 70% of that 70% will be African cities. So you can understand that Africa literally will be the shifting point of human urbanism. It's the fastest urbanizing space in the world. It is the most complex urbanity in the world. And that identity of Africa as a space calls for a lot of opportunistic interventions. Afro-minimalism, on the other hand, it's a tiny, 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 tiny discourse within the whole negotiation of what African design is. African minimalism is a hybridity, a fusion of what the Western minimalist stuff is and what Africans have. So it's a merger of cultures, which there's absolutely nothing bad with it.
But if you look at Afro-minimalism, the problem with it, because every approach has a problem. The problem with Afro-minimalism is that it takes more of the Western. It uses the Afro parts as a tool to describe the Western. And that actually increases as you go up the scale, from the wristwatch to the city. And so I think that's what I have to say about it. There are other approaches, many more that I cannot talk about because of the time, but yeah,
Okay.
that's what it is.
All right, thank you. Dr. Makinde?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, with regards to the first question, I think there's too much diversity in Africa for there to be for you to be able to define it in one single.
Yeah.
I mean, there's as we've talked about the different languages, the different cultures, different approaches to life. So I think the problem, or rather, what I see all the time, particularly from the West, is an attempt to try and group, the entire continent as one monolithic body, which we are not.
Exactly.
So
It's easy for them to do.
because
Because they are more holistic than us. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Dr. Tuoyo?
I mean, the only thing I will add to that is that I still think for certain things that we find that are similar in nature, either from a standpoint of, our socioeconomic positions, challenges with power, our communal living experiences and whatnot. Things like, when we look at Francis Carey's schools, the public schools that he does, you can look at that and you can relate to why, you'd have had a Jack-on-Day school back in the day, and you can relate to why, if somebody had improved on that model, we probably could have done something along those lines, because we're also dealing with climatic conditions that are similar, economics that, sustainable economics that would probably need you to do like a low, what do you call it?
Reduced
like
budgets,
low income type of, So some things are similar, and some things, if we tried, and then even low income housing, that if we tried to solve certain problems, you would find typologies generating in different environments that are actually quite similar, because our responses will probably have similarities in them, just because of maybe like zones that you have, regional zones where you have similar, climatic conditions. Like I said, the struggle with power in Africa, it's a problem that's common to all of us. The struggles with, and then materiality as well. The abundance of the materials that we have that are, easy to get. We all have them as well. So, but I think what tended to happen, and this goes back to, I think, the opening commentary by Dr. Stephen, was the moment we started to look to Western notions and also trying to follow Western ways, we never took time to develop our own architecture. We never took time, and when I say develop, I mean going back to where we were paused, redirected, and then interestingly, I will say though that there were even foreigners who came in and tried, not necessarily to overly, I worked in James Cubitt Architects my early years out of college, and I know, whether it was paying lip service to or whatnot, sometimes, they try to use, art, metal work and different things to sort of ascribe certain, artistic notions, whether it was window dressing and all. But you look at a building like the Senate Building, University of Lagos, for example, very consciously, they lifted up the building from the floor because they were implanting a new building in an area that already had like a
dense development.
Yeah, dense development, and also had like an existing pedestrian network, and they didn't want to interrupt that, so they put the building lightly on the ground. They also prioritize, illumination, shading, and even maintenance, because the egg crate around the building was such that you could walk out on it and clean the glazing without, needing like the expensive window cleaning cradles and things. So you did have foreigners come in and say, this is not London, no? Let's try and think about how to design in this environment for this environment and all. So, and then they also train architects who, whether it's colonial and pre-colonial, who try to sort of find the balance between the two. And maybe it's generations after that we're having some of these architects today saying Afro-minimalism is the way. But the thing is, how much of the foreign are we taking? and putting forward, and how much of the local are we
Inputting
into it.
All right, thank you very much. We had one more question, and then, yeah.
I think what I'm going to talk about has been mentioned briefly. I just want to zoom more into it. The gentleman in white talked about the history, saying that Africans have been building story buildings from way back. I think it's very important to bring us back to the fact that we have done a lot of things that has been buried in history purposefully, and I feel that education now has taken us away from ourselves. So most of the time we're looking at what we do as we don't have knowledge of where we're coming from, and we're being redirected to a new position. So what happens is, like, even when we go to school now, no one teaches us what happened in Africa. They only teaches us what happened in the West. So the mind says that that is the only option we have. I've been very fortunate to work in places like Botswana, Swaziland, Lesotho, where I've seen the use of clay, which has been used very effectively, and I've seen round houses built as well. Because when we look from a climate perspective, I think we do a lot of cut and paste, which is we carry the concrete being used in the West. We don't ask why they use it. We use it because we think they know better. But our climate says different. This is a hot environment. The concrete is to stop the cold from coming in. Now we're in an environment where we actually want the breeze to come in because it's hot here. So now, from the use of materials, I just want the panel to comment. The materials we use, are they suitable for environment? I know round houses are possibly better for us, and I know for purposes of space and other reasons, people tend not to use that often. So what is the impact, are we living in line with our environment, in line with who we are? Our buildings suitable for us and our environment? Please, I'll appreciate if you shed a little bit of light on that for me.
I think we take the commentary on the story building and our history and the learning curve on board. And I think with regards to materiality as well, yes, because we've developed an ecosystem in the construction industry that supports production of cement, sandcrete blocks, glass, everything that we have. It's almost like, trying to change cars from petrol to, hydrogen cars. You need the R&D first, and then you need to destroy. Everybody has to get a buy-in, and everybody has to get on board to try to make a switch. And there are also certain limitations as well. You have people who have experimented with mud bricks, earth bricks, even, like a hybrid, where it's a bit of the sandcrete with a bit of, lateritic soil and whatnot. And you even have a couple of industries, I think people that have factories that are making even blocks for that purpose as well. Do they have better, what's the word? Heat, thermal properties to keep out the heat and whatnot. Yes, they do. Is it popular? No, it isn't. Are architects specifying them and using them more? Not as much. Even the hollow clay bricks of once upon a time, because interestingly, some of the old colonial buildings that we have were built with bricks and double wall construction, where it was a cavity wall construction, and the cavity, and first of all, the brick themselves had better thermal properties. The cavity in between kept the, acted like another buffer barrier to keep heat gain from coming through. You had big overhangs, and this is all colonial stuff. Large overhangs, ventilated roofs, and all sorts of things. And those things were things that were similar to the traditional African or Nigerian architecture that we had, because if we either used the wattle and daub type of system, or we had, some kind of, I won't call it brick, but at least unitized mud system, or you had the, proper mud assembly, layered assembly built as well. We had all these things, and all these influences too were similar to that, and understanding that, oh, the reason why they lived like this is because the environment that they lived in, functioned. Why did they have pitch roofs? Why did they have this? It was a response to the environment. But can we get back to doing some of these things and to change the systems? I think it might take 1 or 2 architects at a time. It might take mass movement, but I don't know if we'll be able to build a critical mass quickly enough for the change. But I think the moment certain people start to promote and drive the change, and people have, but quietly so.
Yeah.
You even have little institutes, Nigerian Institute or something or the other, that have explored it, mass housing solutions, and they just fall by the wayside because who stands to benefit from it?
Yeah.
Where are the gains? And then what is it going to cripple when it comes into play?
Okay.
And then for those reasons, these things don't quite. I mean, I want to do a house in the village for my folks, and I'm telling myself I want to use louver window.
All right. Architect Makinde.
Yeah, so I think I would say maybe we should not be so, as much as we want to remain true to our identity, not fixated on some of the things that we used back in the past. Because even in the Western world, back in the days in Italy, and in Europe, they used to build with stones, large walls, because they were load-bearing. There was no development of concrete at some point, so they could not cantilever. But as, technologies developed and new materials came to bear, things evolved. So I think we shouldn't be afraid to evolve the way we look at the materials we used to build. Not everything from the West is, bad. I think there are some things that, because civilization and technology has taken us to that point, it has to be, so we should look at ways to, incorporate our identity, but not necessarily throwing away the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
For instance, if you're going to build a large stadium, a football stadium, because buildings are becoming more complex,
Exactly.
a large stadium of maybe an 80,000 capacity stadium, I don't see how you can do that with more than, because you have to, an enclosed stadium, for instance, that has a retractable roof,
Yep.
So there are things that we have to accept that this is evolvement of technology around the world, and we need to move along with that. I don't see, anybody pushing for the African car. Cars will be cars, tires will be tires, or anybody pushing for the African plane. I think architecture in Africa needs to evolve along those, not necessarily throw away what we have, but let it stay true to our, climatic conditions, which is God-given, and true to our own identities.
All right, thank you. Dr. Stephen, your final comments, and please round this off with your final thoughts.
Yeah. I think in response to the last comment, I think it's very important. Materials are important, but I think what is important is the identity and the philosophy of the materials, the reputation of the materials. Mud does not really have a strong reputation in the Nigerian build space ecosystem. I mean, I'm very familiar with Eswatini and also Botswana. I've been there a number of times. As a matter of fact, we're setting up shop there in March next year. If you look at Gaborone and all these spaces, they have a more intimate connection with their culture. You go to Gaborone, in Botswana, it's one of the most beautiful spaces you can ever be in Africa. I stand to be corrected. It's an amazing place, and the architecture their culture of building is extremely sophisticated, and the way they inculcate their culture into almost everything they do is really, there's this system of this building called the Golta. The Golta is like this circular enclosement and it's very spiritual, it's very cultural, and you see that play out not even when they don't use mud. It plays out, so it's not about the material itself, it's about the architecture, the design, the philosophy of it. So sometimes we get fixated on the materials, and like he said, it's true. There are some things you can do based on what you want to do that you cannot use some materials for, you can use some materials for. But we also have to start from the epistemic point of view. We have to understand that developing the knowledge is key. And that is one of the places where we are found very wanting in Nigeria. We don't want to go back to the knowledge. Knowledge doesn't have a huge reputation. because people don't want to be told that they don't know. And so we need to, it starts from the schools as well, because there's so many more things that mud can be, rather than just, who says mud cannot handle cantilevers? I'm not saying it must, I'm not saying it should, but the research should be done in the context of the things that we're going on. You'll be surprised what, even at the AA school in Harvard, in Cambridge, the last time I was there, what they're currently doing with mud, what they're currently doing with wood. African wood, there's a man, Professor, I've forgotten his name, I think my name's Ramage. What he's doing with wood, with research, with African materials. Yeah. They're cantilevering 10, 15 meters with mud beams in Cambridge, right? And they are going so deep into these things with wood construction and all these things. We are not. We are just waiting for the fully baked information to come and say, oh, let's just use what they use, it's fine. I mean, mainstream practice, but how do we start to be at the cutting edge to push the boundaries of what we currently know from our own contexts and start building and design? So it starts from the schools, it starts from the research units. When we stop embezzling money for research, when we start bringing in the right people, when our research centers start bringing in intelligent people, and when students are being given admission because of their talent, the ecosystem has to change. And there's very little architects in practice can do. If you get a brief this afternoon, you work with what is available to you. You don't wait for 11 years of research to do. Yeah, the client, you work with, so you can't even blame architects in practice. The ecosystem, the value chain of knowledge has to start from the beginning, and then we can now tap into what we're doing, and then we can now move forward. So I think that is the way we can do it. We're most probably working on something like a large civil space, like a micro city in Botswana soon. And the materials, the approach, and everything, we're taking it from what we find there because we can see it. We don't have to think, oh, what is their culture? Yeah. You drive down in Habaron, you can see it. It's everywhere. It's in their design. The altar it's amazing. It's easy, but if you come here and you want to do something, it's a montage. It's like a collage. You go to here, there's an Italian building here, there's a Portuguese building here, there's a Brazilian thing going on here, there's something that even the architect who designed it doesn't even know. I mean, so there are all these things going on. So if you're designing a transcript or a neighborhood, you don't even know what to, so it's okay to have a false identity sometimes, but to have no identity, that is very detrimental to the next generation. So I think if we're planning, in summary, if we're planning our future and we're working towards the future of architecture and the urban space and the built environment, I think what is really important is to understand ourselves, understand our philosophy, and try to cultivate our knowledge ourselves, and not just think it's the job of architects who are currently practicing, who are trying to look for the bottom line of their cash check to, they can do it, but they're already in the system, it's rigid. And clients have very rigid expectations. So the ecosystem, the value chain has to come from the knowledge space. Thank you.
Thank you very much.